everyone. So I'm going to be mainly talking about chapter 12, which was diagnosing dyslexia in the school-age child and kind of how to diagnose dyslexia and the tests and stuff that you'll do for that. So before I get into that, there were just a couple of things at the beginning of the chapter that I thought were important that I wanted to point out. So it said tens of thousands of children who are struggling to read and have clinical symptoms of dyslexia are going undiagnosed. It gave an example of Andrew in the chapter, and I thought this was a very good example, and it kind of helped me realize a little better some of the things that people could be missing. It's important to consider each of the components of the diagnostic puzzle, what each component contributes, and how to synthesize all the pieces together to kind of realize exactly what's behind the dyslexia. Current practice recognizes that dyslexia is a clinical diagnosis based on a clinical judgment. Must be made by an experienced clinician who looks at both the person's history and symptoms and their learning profile. This is going to look at their cognitive and achievement abilities. Dyslexia is not diagnosed by a single score on a test, but a consideration of characteristics of the disorder. This is what makes it so important that educators and evaluators become more knowledgeable about dyslexia. There are going to be 3 steps of the evaluation process. The first one being that you establish a reading problem according to the student's age and education. And you're going to, the second step, you're going to gather evidence supporting its unexpectedness. So for example, is there a high learning capability, but yet the student is just not achieving where you thought they would be in reading? And the third one, demonstrate evidence of a phonologic weakness. Okay, and so as I said, because there's no single test that can determine this, there will be standardized tests given, like untimed tests, for example, of single real word and pseudo word reading, like the Woodcock-Johnson test for achievement, for example. And I'm actually kind of familiar with a lot of the tests that I'm going to be talking about because I am taking an assessment class right now. We just had a midterm, and I had to I was given all this information about a student, and I had to look at their scores and kind of see where it was on the scales and what they qualified for. So it's kind of interesting that we're doing these chapters right now in the book. So this test that I just talked about, it's going to measure academic achievement. They're also going to look at how students can read pseudo words, made up words. This is important for a dyslexic diagnosis. This is going to test a child's ability to sound out words, map letters to sounds. The ability to read nonsense words is one of the best measures of phonologic decoding skills in children. Most children generally reach their full capacity to sound out nonsense words by adolescence. They're also going to test for reading fluency to see how quickly someone can read single words and pseudo words. So again, those made up words. They're going to test for oral reading fluency, so they're going to read aloud and have some comprehension questions. They're going to do a written language test to look for spelling. They might also take something, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, called the Wechsler Intelligence Skill for Children. This is one that I just looked at in that class I was talking about. This test will reveal areas of strength. For example, maybe in areas of abstract thinking and reasoning. They're also going to look at the reading comprehension. Dyslexic readers often do better on reading comprehension tests because they can figure out words based on the other words in the passage, because they're not just singled out, like it's going to be in sentences or paragraphs. So they're able to kind of figure out what the word is. Okay. This is a little bit out of order, but it did say after a student is evaluated, there's a pattern to look for in the test results to diagnose dyslexia. So you're going to look for things like difficulty reading single words, having poor phonological skills, having a particularly difficult time decoding nonsense or unfamiliar words, having a particularly difficult time reading single words when speed is required. If it's not required to read it fast, they might be okay. Having a lack of fluency shown by oral reading and a lack of inflection, poor spelling, trouble reading short function words, their reading comprehension will be superior to decoding individual words, They might have average or super intelligence, and there's going to be a disparity between their intelligence and their reading. They're also going to have a test of phonological processing. So this is going to ask them to pull a word apart and then delete a certain phoneme. For example, they might say, can you say crane without the R? So they'd be looking for the answer of cane. Kids who can break apart spoken words into phonemes will not be able to link the sounds. They're also going to look at their vocabulary. This is going to show a general index of language skills. So they're going, like, they might look at 4 pictures and they're going to have some choices here. And if it doesn't require a verbal response, dyslexic kids may do okay on this since they don't have to recall a specific name on their own. But if it does recall a verbal response, it would be more difficult for them. I'm sorry, I think there was just one more thing. Yes, so one other thing that I did want to say was, if a child has a major problem in reading comprehension, they should not be diagnosed as dyslexic, but rather as having a reading comprehension problem. So like a specific reading comprehension deficit. So when I read through chapter 12, this kind of helped me to see how it's not just like one thing that they do to see if someone's dyslexic, but it's kind of like a combination of things. How they said at the beginning, what each component contributes and how to synthesize all the pieces. So it's kind of like interesting how they can actually figure out if a student is dyslexic. So looking forward to hearing your responses.